What if I told you that some of the funniest people who ever lived were systematically prevented from making the world laugh? What if the jokes that could have healed our deepest wounds were silenced before they could reach our ears? Welcome back to Arc of Ages, where hidden laughter finds its voice. I'm your host, Max Winkler, and today we're stepping into the shadows of comedy clubs, television studios, and concert halls where brilliant black comedians were told their humor was too dangerous for audiences to hear. This isn't just about lost laughs or forgotten punchlines. This is about humor as resistance, comedy as truth-telling, and laughter as liberation, all of which made these comedians threats to systems that preferred controls over catharsis. Comedy has always been dangerous because it reveals truth through laughter, challenges power through punchlines, and builds community through shared recognition of absurdity. The comedians on our list today weren't just funny, they were revolutionary. By the end of this journey, you'll understand how laughter itself was weaponized against black voices, how humor became a battlefield for social change, and most importantly, how our Arc of Ages community can restore the joy that was stolen from us. Arc of Ages family, we've built a community of thousands of truth seekers, story guardians, and history hunters. Today, we're adding a new role to our mission, laughter liberators. Here's what makes today's excavation different. They didn't just silence these comedians, they stole our collective joy. Every joke that wasn't told, every laugh that wasn't shared, every moment of healing humor that was suppressed represents a theft from our cultural soul. As we uncover each comedian together, I want you to do something powerful. When a story makes you angry about what was stolen from us, comment, bring back the laughter with the comedian's name. Let's flood this section with demands for the joy that was denied. Because here's the truth they feared. Black comedy doesn't just make people laugh, it makes them think, question, and connect across difference. These comedians weren't silenced for being unfunny. They were silenced for being dangerously hilarious. Today, we become the audience that segregation tried to prevent. We become the comedy club that censorship tried to close. We become the community that refuses to let laughter be a casualty of oppression. Ready to start uncovering the jokes they didn't want you to hear? Let's dig in and bring back the laughter. Number 10. Pigmeat Markham. Our investigation begins with a comedian whose name reveals the complexity of black humor in a white supremacist society. A performer who used stereotypes as weapons while being punished for the very act of making people laugh. Dewey Pigmeat Markham was one of the most popular comedians in Black America for over 4 decades, creating characters and catchphrases that influenced generations of performers. But his comedy existed in a world designed to contain and control black laughter. Markham's genius was in subversive minstrelsy. He took the degrading stereotypes that white audiences expected and flipped them into coded resistance that spoke directly to black experience. His "Here Come the Judge" character became a cultural phenomenon that influenced everyone from Flip Wilson to Dave Chappelle. But here's where Markham's silencing becomes systematic. When television emerged as the dominant entertainment medium, his style of comedy was deemed too black for mainstream audiences, while simultaneously being criticized by civil rights leaders as reinforcing negative stereotypes. Think about the impossible position this created. Markham's comedy was simultaneously too threatening for white comfort and too problematic for black respectability politics. He was caught between audiences that demanded different things from black humor. When Laugh-In appropriated his "Here come the judge" catchphrase and made it famous without crediting him, Markham watched his creation become a mainstream sensation while he remained relegated to the Chitlin circuit. The silencing wasn't just about denying Markham television opportunities. It was about erasing the origins of comedy innovations that white performers could then claim as their own. Pigmeat Markham died in 1981, having spent his final years watching comedy evolve using techniques he had pioneered while his name was forgotten by the industry he had helped shape. But Markham's legacy lives on in every comedian who uses humor to speak truth to power, every performer who finds ways to make audiences laugh while making them think, every artist who understands that comedy can be both entertainment and resistance. The Arc of Ages community recognizes what history tried to obscure. Pigmeat Markham wasn't just a comedian, he was a cultural architect whose innovations shaped American humor while being denied credit for his construction. Number 9. Jackie Moms Mabley. Jackie Moms Mabley was the most successful black female comedian of her era, selling out theaters and breaking attendance records. So why did television and mainstream media treat her like she didn't exist? For over 60 years, Moms Mabley perfected a persona that allowed her to say absolutely anything. The wisecracking grandmother who could deliver cutting social commentary disguised as folksy humor. But Mom's genius wasn't just in her delivery, it was in her protection strategy. By performing as an elderly, non-threatening grandmother figure, she could criticize racism, sexism, and social inequality in ways that would have been dangerous coming from a younger, more conventionally attractive performer. Think about what she was doing. In the 1940s and 50s, Moms Mabley was performing material about police brutality, economic inequality, and sexual liberation that wouldn't become mainstream comedy topics for decades. Her album, Moms Mabley at the UN, reached number 7 on the Billboard charts in 1961, making her one of the best-selling comedy recording artists in America. But television bookers consistently passed her over for family-friendly programming. The silencing was coded in respectability politics. Mabley's appearance, her dialect, her working-class persona were deemed inappropriate for television audiences that were supposedly ready for black entertainment. But here's the most heartbreaking part. When Moms finally got television appearances in the 1960s and 70s, producers often edited her performances to remove the most pointed social commentary, leaving only the safe, entertaining portions. They wanted Moms Mabley's audience appeal without her social consciousness, her humor without her truth-telling, her entertainment value without her resistance message. When Moms died in 1975, she was remembered primarily as a novelty act rather than recognized as the pioneering social commentator and feminist voice she had been throughout her career. But Mom Mabley's template survives in every comedian who uses humor to make hard truths digestible, every performer who finds ways to speak power to truth, every artist who understands that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is make people laugh while making them think. The Arc of Ages community understands what television executives missed. Mom's Mabley wasn't just funny. She was dangerous because her laughter was liberation, her humor was healing, and her comedy was revolution disguised as entertainment. Number 8. Red Foxx pre-Sanford. Before Sanford and Son made him a household name, Red Foxx was the king of party records. Explicit comedy albums that sold millions of copies while being banned from radio and ignored by mainstream media. For 2 decades before television, Red Foxx built the largest independent comedy empire in America, selling over 20 million records through a distribution network that bypassed traditional media gatekeepers entirely. Foxx's party records weren't just comedy. They were uncensored black humor that spoke to experiences, frustrations, and perspectives that mainstream comedy completely ignored. His material was raw, real, and revolutionary. But here's what makes Foxx's early silencing so systematic. While his records were outselling most mainstream comedy albums, radio stations refused to play them. Television shows wouldn't book him, and comedy clubs outside black neighborhoods wouldn't hire him. The entertainment industry created a parallel universe. Red Foxx was simultaneously one of the most successful comedians in America and completely invisible to white media consumers. And when civil rights organizations criticized Foxx's explicit content as harmful to black respectability, he found himself attacked from multiple directions. Too raw for white acceptance, too negative for black approval. Think about the cultural loss this represents. Red Foxx was documenting authentic black humor, preserving vernacular comedy traditions, and creating an historical record of how black communities used laughter to cope with oppression. When television finally discovered Foxx in the 1970s, they offered him mainstream success in exchange for sanitizing his comedy. Sanford and Son made him famous, but silenced the raw, more revolutionary voice that had built his empire. The tragedy is that mainstream audiences never got to experience the full genius of Red Foxx's comedy. They only saw the watered-down version that television deemed acceptable. But Foxx's pre-television career proves something crucial. Black audiences have always been sophisticated enough to support complex, challenging comedy that speaks to their full humanity rather than sanitized entertainment designed for white comfort. The Arc of Ages community recognizes what the entertainment industry tried to deny. Red Foxx's early career showed that authentic black comedy could build massive audiences and financial empires without seeking white approval or sanitizing black experiences. And now for our 7th silenced comedian, Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory proved that comedy could be a weapon for social change, but the price of being a comedian activist was systematic exclusion from the entertainment industry he had helped integrate. In the early 1960s, Dick Gregory was one of the hottest comedians in America, breaking the color barrier at top nightclubs and becoming the first black comedian to be a regular guest on television talk shows. But Gregory made a choice that would define and limit his career. He decided to use his platform for civil rights activism, participating in marches, protests, and political campaigns that made him radioactive to entertainment executives. Think about the courage this required. Gregory was walking away from potential wealth and mainstream fame to become a full-time freedom fighter who happened to tell jokes. The silencing began immediately. Television bookers stopped calling, nightclub owners canceled contracts, and record labels dropped his comedy albums. Being a civil rights comedian was apparently too dangerous for American entertainment. But Gregory's silencing reveals something profound about American comedy. The industry was willing to accept black comedians as entertainers, but not as social critics, as performers, but not as political voices. When Gregory began focusing on issues like police brutality, voting rights, and economic inequality, his comedy became too political for venues that had previously celebrated his humor. The most heartbreaking part? Gregory's later comedy albums, recorded during his activist period, contained some of the most insightful social commentary ever put on record, but they were largely ignored by mainstream media and comedy historians. By the 1970s, Dick Gregory had become more famous as an activist than as a comedian, his early comedy career overshadowed by his political work in ways that diminished both achievements. When Gregory died in 2017, most obituaries focused on his civil rights work while barely mentioning his revolutionary impact on comedy. The man who had proven that humor could be a force for justice was remembered primarily as an activist who used to tell jokes. But Dick Gregory's legacy lives on in every comedian who refuses to stay in their lane, every performer who uses humor to challenge injustice, every artist who understands that comedy without conscience is just entertainment. The Arc of Ages community understands what the entertainment industry couldn't accept. Dick Gregory showed that comedy at its highest level is truth-telling, that laughter at its most powerful is liberation, and that humor at its most dangerous is hope. Arc of Ages family, we can feel the energy building in our virtual comedy club. The stories we're uncovering together aren't just about silenced laughter, they're about stolen joy, suppressed truth, and the systematic theft of our collective humor. Before we dive into our most shocking revelations, I need you to understand something crucial. Every comedian we've uncovered so far developed survival strategies that are still being used by black performers today. Drop a laughing emoji if you're recognizing how these historical silencing patterns connect to what you see in today's comedy landscape. Let's show the algorithm that hidden humor history matters to real audiences. Smash that like button if these stories are changing how you think about comedy as resistance, humor as healing, and laughter as liberation. Share this with anyone who needs to understand that being funny has always been dangerous for black voices, because our next 4 comedians were silenced so completely that their names were practically erased from comedy history. We're about to uncover the most systematic suppression of laughter in American entertainment. Are you ready to keep digging for the jokes they buried? Because what we're about to discover will change how you understand the relationship between power and punchlines. Number 6, Mantan Moreland. Mantan Moreland's story is the most complicated on our list because he was simultaneously one of the most successful black entertainers of his era and one of the most systematically erased from entertainment history. Between 1930 and 1950, Mantan Moreland appeared in over 300 films, making him one of the most prolific actors in Hollywood history. His comedy timing was legendary, his physical comedy was unmatched, and his ability to steal scenes was feared by leading men. But Moreland was trapped in the most insidious form of silencing. He was allowed to be successful as long as he played characters that reinforced racial stereotypes. His genius was used to justify the very system that oppressed him. Think about the psychological toll. Moreland knew he was funnier, more talented, more creative than most of the white actors he supported, but the industry only valued his ability to make audiences laugh at black inferiority. And when Moreland tried to expand beyond stereotypical roles, when he attempted to showcase his range as a dramatic actor or serious comedian, the industry simply stopped hiring him. The 1950s brought the cruelest silencing. As civil rights consciousness grew, Moreland's earlier roles became symbols of racial embarrassment rather than recognition of his individual talent trapped within systemic constraints. Suddenly, the man who had brought joy to millions was persona non grata in both Hollywood and black cultural circles. His past success became evidence of racial betrayal rather than survival within impossible circumstances. Mantan Moreland spent his final decades performing in small clubs and community theaters, his incredible talent relegated to venues that couldn't sustain his career or his legacy. When Moreland died in 1973, film historians had already written him out of cinema history. The man who had appeared in more films than most leading men was dismissed as a footnote to more serious entertainment. But recent scholarship by Arc of Ages-style truth seekers has revealed Moreland's true legacy. He was a master comedian who used every opportunity within systemic constraints to showcase black humanity, humor, and intelligence. Mantan Moreland's story teaches us that silencing isn't always about preventing success. Sometimes it's about controlling the narrative around success, ensuring that black achievement serves white supremacist purpose. The Arc of Ages community understands what history tried to obscure. Mantan Moreland wasn't a sellout. He was a survivor whose talent transcended the limitations placed on his opportunity. Number 5. Rudy Ray Moore created his own comedy empire when mainstream entertainment rejected his raw, uncompromising humor. But his independence made him dangerous to an industry that preferred controlling black comedic voices. In the 1970s, while mainstream comedy was sanitized for television consumption, Rudy Ray Moore was recording party albums that sold millions of copies through underground networks that bypassed traditional entertainment gatekeepers entirely. Moore's Dolomite character wasn't just comedy, it was mythology. He created a larger-than-life persona that spoke to black audiences who were tired of seeing themselves diminished, apologetic, or sanitized on mainstream platforms. But Rudy Ray Moore's independence terrified the entertainment industry. Here was a black performer who didn't need their approval, their distribution networks, or their sanitizing influence to reach massive audiences. The silencing came through systematic exclusion. Radio stations refused to play Moore's records. Television shows wouldn't book him, and mainstream comedy venues banned his performances as too explicit for public consumption. Think about the message this sent. Black comedy that celebrated black culture, sexuality, and irreverence without seeking white approval was literally banned from mainstream American entertainment. But Moore's response was revolutionary. He He created his own films, his own distribution system, his own marketing network that proved black audiences would support authentic content even when mainstream media ignored it. Dolomite and Moore's subsequent films made millions of dollars and influenced generations of comedians and filmmakers. But film critics and entertainment historians dismissed them as exploitation rather than recognizing them as independent black cinema. The most insidious silencing was cultural. Moore's work was categorized as blaxploitation rather than comedy. His influence minimized as cult rather than mainstream. His innovation dismissed as underground rather than pioneering. When Moore died in 2008, mainstream obituaries barely mentioned his massive influence on independent filmmaking, his business innovation, or his impact on comedy. He was remembered as a curiosity rather than a revolutionary. But Rudy Ray Moore's legacy lives on in every independent artist who refuses to sanitize their vision for mainstream acceptance. Every comedian who celebrates rather than apologizes for their culture. Every entertainer who builds their own platform when existing systems exclude them. The Arc of Ages community recognizes what the entertainment industry couldn't accept. Rudy Ray Moore proved that black audiences were sophisticated enough to support complex, uncompromising content that spoke to their full humanity rather than acceptable representations designed for white comfort. Number 4. Paul Mooney was comedy's most fearless truth-teller, the writer behind some of the most groundbreaking comedy in television history. But his refusal to soften his social commentary made him too dangerous for an industry that preferred its black comedians grateful and gentle. For decades, Paul Mooney was the secret weapon behind breakthrough black comedy, writing material that pushed boundaries while staying behind the scenes. But when he stepped into the spotlight with his own voice, the industry wasn't ready for unfiltered Mooney. Mooney's stand-up was surgical in its precision. He dissected white supremacy, colorism, and racial hypocrisy with humor so sharp that audiences didn't know whether to laugh or revolt. Often, they did both. But Paul Mooney's comedy crossed lines that the entertainment industry preferred to keep intact. His material about race, sexuality, and power was too honest for television, too confrontational for mainstream venues, too real for sanitized comedy consumption. The silence was systematic. Television networks would hire Mooney to write edgy material for other performers, but wouldn't give him his own platform to deliver that same material directly to audiences. Think about the irony. Paul Mooney's voice was considered essential for creating breakthrough comedy, but too dangerous to be heard directly by the audiences who were already laughing at his material. When Mooney did get television specials or streaming opportunities, they were often buried in late-night slots, given minimal promotion, or released with content warnings that framed his comedy as extreme rather than insightful. The entertainment industry wanted Paul Mooney's brilliance without his politics, his humor without his truth-telling, his talent without his refusal to make white audiences comfortable with their discomfort. And when younger comedians began getting opportunities to say similar things that Mooney had been saying for decades, his pioneering role was often forgotten or minimized in favor of celebrating more palatable breakthrough moments. Paul Mooney died in 2021, having spent his final years watching comedy evolve using techniques and perspectives he had pioneered while receiving minimal recognition for his contributions to the art form. But Mooney's legacy lives on in every comedian who refuses to soften their edge for mainstream acceptance, every writer who prioritizes truth over comfort, every performer who understands that comedy's highest purpose is revelation rather than just entertainment. The Arc of Ages community understands what the entertainment industry couldn't handle. Paul Mooney showed that comedy, at its most powerful, doesn't just make people laugh, it makes them confront truths they've been avoiding. Number 3, Richard Pryor, later career. Everyone knows Richard Pryor revolutionized comedy, but what they don't know is how the entertainment industry systematically silenced his most revolutionary period when his comedy became too real, too raw, and too dangerous for mainstream consumption. In the 1970s, Richard Pryor was the most acclaimed comedian in America, breaking barriers and winning awards. But as his personal struggles intersected with his social commentary, the industry began treating him as a liability rather than a genius. Pryor's later comedy specials contained some of his most insightful material about addiction, mental health, racism, and American society. But instead of being celebrated as a mature artistic evolution, they were dismissed as the ravings of a troubled performer. Think about the tragedy. Just when Pryor's life experiences has given him the deepest material of his career, the entertainment industry decided he was too unpredictable, too honest, too broken to be trusted with major platforms. The silencing was insidious. They didn't ban Richard Pryor, they just stopped promoting him, stopped giving him prime television slots, stopped treating his new material as significant cultural events. And when Pryor's multiple sclerosis began affecting his performances, the industry used his illness as justification for further marginalization, treating his condition as evidence that his comedic voice was no longer relevant. But here's what they missed. Pryor's later material, including his performances while battling MS, contains some of the most honest explorations of vulnerability, mortality, and human frailty ever captured in comedy. The entertainment industry preferred the mythology of prime Richard Pryor to the reality of evolving Richard Pryor, sanitizing his legacy by focusing on his early breakthrough moments while ignoring his continued artistic growth. When Pryor died in 2005, the tributes focused almost exclusively on his 1970s work, treating his final decades as a sad epilogue rather than recognizing them as continued evolution of comedic genius under impossible circumstances. Think about what we lost. Richard Pryor's later comedy could have changed how America talks about addiction, mental health, illness, and aging. Instead, it was treated as a decline of a legend rather than the evolution of an artist. But Pryor's complete legacy lives on in every comedian who refuses to be defined by their past success, every performer who continues evolving despite industry pressure to repeat past formulas, every artist who understands that truth-telling becomes more important, not less, as life gets harder. The Arc of Ages community recognizes what the entertainment industry couldn't accept. Richard Pryor's later career showed that comedy's highest achievement isn't making people comfortable with laughter, it's making them comfortable with truth. Number 2, Dave Chappelle, original Chappelle Show era. Dave Chappelle's story reveals the most modern form of comedian silencing, being offered everything you thought you wanted, then discovering the price of mainstream success was your creative soul and cultural authenticity. In 2005, Dave Chappelle was the most popular comedian in America. His show was Comedy Central's biggest hit, and he had just been offered a $50 million contract, more money than any comedian had ever been offered for television work. But something happened that the entertainment industry didn't anticipate. Dave Chappelle began questioning whether his comedy was empowering black voices or enabling white audiences to laugh at black pain without learning from it. Think about the courage this required. Walking away from $50 million because you realize that your comedy might be doing more harm than good, that your success might be built on the very racial dynamics you thought were challenging. The silencing began immediately. When Chappelle left his show and went to Africa to reassess his career, the entertainment industry and media portrayed him as mentally unstable rather than ethically conscious. For years, Dave Chappelle was effectively blacklisted from major television and film opportunities, not because he wasn't talented, but because his public questioning of comedy's racial dynamics made him dangerous to industry business models. The most insidious part of Chappelle's silencing was psychological. The industry convinced many people that his concerns about racial comedy were evidence of his paranoia rather than legitimate artistical and ethical consideration. And when Chappelle returned to comedy years later, the industry tried to control his narrative by focusing on his comeback rather than acknowledging that his original concerns about racial comedy had been valid and important. But Dave Chappelle's temporary silencing revealed something crucial about modern entertainment: the industry dependence on black creativity while being threatened by black consciousness, their need for black talent while being hostile to black self-determination. Chappelle's eventual return on his own terms, through Netflix specials that addressed his concerns directly, proved that authentic black comedy could find audiences without compromising artistic integrity or cultural responsibility. The Arc of Ages community understands what Dave Chappelle discovered. True artistic freedom sometimes requires walking away from everything you thought you wanted to preserve everything you actually need. Number 1, Lenny Bruce, his inspirational influence on black comedy. Our number 1 entry isn't a black comedian. He was a Jewish white man. But his story reveals how the silencing of white comedian Lenny Bruce was used to justify even more systematic silencing of black comedians who dared to challenge social norms through humor. Lenny Bruce was arrested multiple times, banned from venues, and ultimately silenced for using comedy to challenge religion, politics, and social hypocrisy. But his persecution created a template that was applied even more severely to black comedians. Think about the message this sent. If a white comedian could be destroyed for challenging social norms, what would happen to black comedians who dared to challenge not just social norms, but white supremacy itself? The Bruce precedent was weaponized against black comedians. Venues could refuse bookings by claiming they didn't want Lenny Bruce-type problems. Law enforcement could harass black performers by citing public decency concerns. And media could dismiss revolutionary black comedy as dangerous rather than artistic. But here's what makes this the ultimate silencing story. While Lenny Bruce became a martyr for free speech and is now celebrated as a comedy pioneer, the black comedians who faced even worse persecution for similar or more important social commentary remain largely forgotten. Black comedians were told they couldn't address racism because it was too political, couldn't discuss sexuality because it was too explicit, couldn't challenge authority because it was too dangerous, all while Lenny Bruce was being posthumously celebrated for doing exactly those things. The ultimate irony? Many of the black comedians we've discussed today influenced Lenny Bruce's approach to social commentary, but history remembers him as the originator while they remain footnotes to his legacy. Lenny Bruce's story teaches us that even when white performers face persecution for challenging power through comedy, black performers face exponentially worse consequences for similar or lesser challenges to social order. The Arc of Ages community understands the ultimate lesson. The fight for comedic freedom has always been racialized, with black voices facing the most severe consequences for the same type of truth-telling that eventually makes white performers into legends. Pigmeat Markham, Jackie Moms Mabley, Red Foxx, Dick Gregory, Mantan Moreland, Rudy Ray Moore, Paul Mooney, Richard Pryor, Dave Chappelle, the Lenny Bruce precedent that silenced them all. 10 stories of laughter stolen, humor suppressed, and joy denied. But tonight, in this moment, with this community, that theft ends and the laughter returns. Arc of Ages family, we are now the comedy club that segregation tried to prevent. We are the audience that censorship tried to divide. We are the community that refuses to let laughter be a casualty of oppression. But remembering these comedians isn't enough. We must become the platform they never had. We want you to choose one comedian from today's list and become their champion. Share their material, quote their jokes, spread their humor, make their laughter live again. Drop their names in the comments with "Never Silenced Again" in all caps. Let's create a resurrection that shows the world how a community can restore joy that powerful interests tried to steal. Subscribe to Arc of Ages if you haven't already. You're not just following a channel, you're joining a movement of joy liberation. Hit that notification bell because every video we release brings back laughter that was denied for decades. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand that comedy has always been dangerous, humor has always been revolutionary, and laughter has always been a form of resistance that no amount of oppression can permanently silence. And check out our Voices They Couldn't Silence playlist. We're building the ultimate archive of suppressed black creativity across every field of human expression. Most importantly, understand this. Every time you laugh at authentic black comedy, every time you support comedians who speak truth through humor, every time you defend a performer's right to make audiences uncomfortable with reality, you're practicing the resistance that these 10 pioneers died fighting for. Because the ultimate victory over silencing isn't just remembering the comedians who were suppressed, it's creating a world where truth-telling through humor is so widespread, so protected, so celebrated that no power structure can ever silence laughter again. This is Arc of Ages, where silence is never permanent, where laughter eventually finds its voice, and where a community of joy seekers can resurrect any humor that oppression tried to bury. They tried to silence the laughter, but they couldn't silence the